Between the glittering shop windows and the constant noise of the avenues, a silent collapse is beginning to take shape. It doesn't appear in economic reports, nor in headlines that exalt growth. It emerges between the lines, in tired expressions, overdue bills, and promises that no longer fit within American reality. The country that for decades was synonymous with prosperity now faces an invisible erosion, not of its soil, but of the collective soul that sustained it. Under the glare of lights that never go out, millions of citizens live a distorted version of the American dream. Families sleep in parking lots, college students count pennies to eat, and skilled workers get lost in food donation lines. Progress is still displayed on billboards, but hope has become a luxury for the few. American abundance, once exported as a symbol of success, now reveals the hidden cost of its own promise, a society saturated with consumption and empty of meaning. By 2025, the cracks will be impossible to ignore. The crisis is no longer economic, it's human. It manifests itself in every supermarket that hides empty shelves behind cameras, in every fired executive who still wears a suit to maintain appearances. In this documentary, we will expose what the system tries to silence. The 7 truths behind the facade of American success, stories that reveal where, when, and why the empire of abundance began to crumble. If you want to understand what's really behind these cracks and how they're reshaping America's social map, subscribe to the channel now and follow this investigation to the end. What you'll discover here doesn't make the headlines, but it completely changes how we see the most powerful country in the world. The signs of collapse didn't appear suddenly. They spread like small cracks in a structure that had long been yielding under its own weight. On the streets of Los Angeles, old mansions surrounded by palm trees now display "sold at auction" signs. In Detroit, the echoing sounds of factories have been replaced by the constant hum of generators, used by families who can no longer afford their electricity bills. In Texas, entire neighborhoods have disappeared under the silence. What was once synonymous with prosperity has become a graveyard of "for sale" signs. Official statistics speak of recovery and stability, but the images tell a different story, one that television doesn't show. Discrete lines form in front of warehouses distributing basic food. Baskets, supermarkets still full of products, house consumers pushing empty carts limited by cards that don't work. It's invisible poverty, dressed as normality. It has no defined face, no social boundaries. It could live next door, it could be inside your house, it could be you. Meanwhile, news programs display carefully adjusted numbers, repeating the same refrain. The economy is recovering. But on the streets, the optimism sounds ironic. The collapse didn't arrive like a cinematic disaster. It came as a deteriorating routine, a hope that fades slowly without fanfare. The United States is experiencing a monumental contradiction, material abundance that masks emotional bankruptcy. The empire of freedom is chasing something it no longer knows how to name. Every corner seems to echo the question no one wants to ask: how long can we pretend everything is all right? If the streets already reveal the symptom, what happens behind the financial curtains can be even more disturbing. And that's where the real story begins, where the invisible becomes the issue. Behind the shop windows and optimistic rhetoric of Wall Street, there is a mechanism that few understand, and even fewer dare to question. The financial collapse of 2025 was not a surprise, but the predictable result of a system that learned to profit from scarcity. While the average citizen counted pennies, entire corporations inflated their profits to figures that don't exist in the real world. Money began to circulate only within algorithms, floating in databases, never reaching the hands of those who actually work. Behind the scenes, executives and politicians fueled a cycle where debt became the country's most valuable commodity. Banks don't sell credit. They sell desperation disguised as opportunity. Every loan, every refinancing, and every promise of financial relief becomes an invisible chain that binds millions to the illusion of stability. It's a carefully choreographed theater where the spectator believes they are a protagonist, when in reality they are merely part of the scenery. The markets call it a natural adjustment, but between the lines, It's something deeper, a silent reconfiguration of power. Wealth hasn't disappeared. It has simply changed address. It has migrated from the pockets of the middle class to funds that no one can trace, fueling digital fortunes protected by laws that the system itself created. Meanwhile, the media reproduces the same narrative, sustaining the trust of a public that fears facing the abyss. The truth is that the invisible collapse was planned to appear as an accident, and in this spectacle of data and promises, misery has ceased to be a mistake. It has become a strategy. But if the system was designed to break the average citizen, what happens when that machine starts devouring itself? What happens when the empire that controls the world loses control of itself? The signs are already piling up. And the consequences of this manipulation are beginning to transform entire cities into monuments to a crumbling future. The consequences of the crisis are not limited to numbers in reports or graphs projected on conference screens. They spread across the territory like a fog that silently corrodes the structures of a country, accustomed to hiding its ruins under a veneer of progress. In small inland towns, local commerce disappears, schools close their doors, and hospitals begin to operate on a survival basis. Unemployment is no longer a statistic, it's a landscape. In metropolises, the contrast becomes grotesque. Luxury condominiums remain illuminated, while entire city blocks are plunged into darkness. The gap between privilege and need is no longer merely economic, but existential. The middle class, once the mainstay of stability, finds itself squeezed between the fear of falling and the impossibility of rising. Entire families live on revolving credit, while banks expand their profits and call the phenomenon sustainable growth. Automation accelerates the disappearance of traditional professions. Machines replace not only manual labor, but also the dignity of those who depended on it for their existence. Each new technology, presented as a symbol of efficiency, erases yet another human face from the productive system. The collapse is not made up of explosions or sudden disasters. It is a progressive blackout of identity. In the invisible borders of this new scenario, poverty takes on unprecedented forms. It inhabits tidy apartments, disguised under streaming subscriptions and illusions of digital status. It is the poverty that consumes, that displays, that tries to prove to itself that it still belongs to something. An entire country moves between the fear of losing and the shame of admitting that it has already lost. Meanwhile, the economic clock keeps ticking, ignoring the sound of footsteps receding from the cities and the voices fading from the factories. What comes next is not just recession. It's the emotional emptiness of a nation that no longer recognizes its own reflection. But if the financial system is collapsing, what about the soul of a country that still considers itself invincible? Leave your opinion in the comments below. While the economy disintegrates on the margins, the emptiness that settles in the center of American life reveals an even deeper crisis, that of identity. Millions of people continue to wake up every day, keep to schedules, answer emails, consume distractions, and believe that constant movement means progress. But behind the screens, the electric cars and the lit shop windows, the feeling of moral exhaustion becomes inevitable. The promise of freedom has become a race without a finish line. Cities continue to pulsate, but they no longer breathe. Crowded cafes hide loneliness. Social networks overflow with edited lives that don't exist outside the screens. Technology, created to bring us closer, has become the architecture of isolation. Each notification is a reminder that connection has lost its soul. The modern emptiness is not silence. It is constant, deafening noise that prevents the individual from hearing their own conscience. In middle-class neighborhoods, consumption has become an emotional refuge. Indebted families are trading simple dinners for automated deliveries and smiles for likes. Remote work promised comfort, but brought a new form of imprisonment. The home as an office, routine as a prison. People, surrounded by conveniences, live trapped in the feeling that something essential has been lost, and they no longer know where to look. In the United States of 2025, the collapse is not just economic. It's existential. It's the weariness of a society that believes it can buy the meaning of life. Abundance has become anesthesia, and progress, a mirror reflecting its own loneliness. Amidst the excess, what's missing is what hurts the most: belonging. And while the country tries to fill the void with speed, a silent fact begins to expose the true magnitude of this fall, because what follows is not opinion, it's fact. And the numbers that support the truth are as cold as the asphalt of the cities that once promised freedom. Numbers don't lie, and when they are ignored, they come back to collect the price from those who pretended not to see. Official reports attempt to downplay the tragedy, but the numbers don't bend to rhetoric. By 2025, more than 38 million Americans will depend on food banks to survive, a number higher than during the Great Depression. In the last 5 years, the average cost of housing has increased by 40%, while wages have remained stagnant. On every corner of New York City, there are more people sleeping on the streets than students in public libraries. The picture is merciless. 6 out of 10 citizens live in debt, trapped by never-ending loans. 7 out of 10 families wouldn't have enough money to cope with a medical emergency. And behind these statistics, a silent phenomenon is worsening: emotional debt. Men and women who have worked their entire lives are now trading their own time as their last resort. Credit networks call this financial adaptation. But what lies beneath this expression is an ethical collapse. The system has begun to profit from people's inability to start over. Each individual bankruptcy is a cog that feeds collective profit. Failure has become a product, and as the data accumulates, the country seems numb. Hunger no longer causes astonishment. Despair has become a statistic. The empire of abundance has learned to coexist with scarcity, like someone ignoring a fire behind the wall. But there is one number that doesn't appear in any report, the one that measures the loss of faith. When a nation ceases to believe in its own future, collapse stops being a projection and becomes a reality. And if the numbers are already screaming, what comes next is the echo, the sound of a tomorrow that may never come. The United States of 2025 is experiencing a silent turning point. Financial collapse is no longer a distant warning, but an everyday landscape. Closed stores, empty condos, and parking lots full of trailers have transformed the country's map into an X-ray of exhaustion. This is not just an economic crisis, it is the erosion of a way of life. The same society that once exported the dream now finds itself forced to confront its own nightmare. In the suburbs, a scarcity of jobs coexists with an abundance of screens. Entertainment has become an escape, and information anesthesia. The truth has become a nuisance, replaced by convenient versions of reality. The government promises recovery. Economists speak of natural cycles. But the average citizen, trapped between bills and promises, feels that something deeper is collapsing, something that cannot be measured in indices or graphs. The financial system has learned to survive without the people, and the people try to survive without hope. The noise of the advertisement still repeats that everything will get better, but the sound from the streets says otherwise. There is a weariness that spreads like an invisible disease, corroding the will to continue believing. What if this collapse isn't the end, but merely a rehearsal for something bigger? What if what's crumbling isn't the economy, but the very idea of civilization as we know it? The future doesn't begin with explosions, but with prolonged silences, and the American silence is becoming deafening. Because when silence is the only answer left, the next sound may be that of the final fall. The collapse spreading across the United States is not merely economic, it is moral, emotional, and spiritual. The country that once prided itself on being a symbol of freedom now struggles to breathe under the weight of its own illusion. The cities remain lit, but the light has lost its purpose. The glow that once illuminated skyscrapers now reflects the decay of a society that confused value with price and success with survival. What is disintegrating before the world's eyes is not just a power, it is the belief that progress without humanity can still sustain anything. In forgotten peripheries, silence replaces speeches. Entire families are relearning to live with the bare minimum, rediscovering the value of small things, a shared meal, a supportive neighborhood, a moment of calm. It's ironic that the same country that built empires in the name of productivity now needs to slow down to avoid complete collapse. The downturn revealed something that the figures don't record: the need for reconnection, for soul, for purpose. The invisible collapse has become a mirror, reflecting not only economic failure, but the existential emptiness of an era that believed it could live without meaning. Technology brought convenience, but stole time. Globalization promised unity, but delivered loneliness. The price of progress was the forgetting of who we truly are. And perhaps within this ruin lies the opportunity no one expected, the chance to start over. Because every civilization first collapses from within, and every reconstruction begins the moment humanity decides to look at what remains and not at what has been lost. The collapse doesn't begin when the money runs out. It begins when people stop feeling, and perhaps the greatest act of resistance in this time of indifference is simply to continue feeling. If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe now to Discover American Geographic. Here we reveal the truths the system tries to hide, because understanding the collapse is the first step to surviving it. Enjoy the video, share it with those who still believe the American dream is alive, and get ready. The next chapter of this story has already begun.